Gee, folks, thank you so much for coming. I'm really, really impressed with this beautiful facility. And I have to add, this is the second time I've been in your community. And I like it a heck of a lot better than Seattle, I'll tell you. First thing I'd like to point out or make mention of is that what I'm going to be speaking about is not something I read or something that my parents told me. Sound okay back there? Okay. But I lived through it. And the only reason I bring that up is forgot what I had for dinner a couple of nights ago, but yet I remember an awful lot about what happened. You know, what, 80 years ago? My God. I used to have hair then. Yeah. The PowerPoint that I'm going to show has a couple of things that I'm sure I'm not here to speak down to anybody, but I do speak to quite a few schools as low as the 8th grade. So there are some things, of course, that as adults you know, but something that I wanted to repeat for the youngsters that we have actually here, and thank you for coming. And as I say, I was born in the Netherlands, also referred to as Holland, and for the young people, geographically speaking, it's just a very small country on the western slope of the continent of Europe. That insert we put in there for the purpose, geographically, of showing that the entire eastern border borders Germany. One of the things that even the youngsters, most of them know, but they hear a lot about names and more so about numbers. And I like to put a picture with numbers. And as I refer to the youngsters, and I'll refer to everybody, we're all familiar with the horrible event of 9/11. When 3,000 innocent people lost their lives. Picture it. I mean, we got a pretty full crowd here, 7, 8, whatever, 100 people. Picture 3,000 people lost their lives. To put it in a clearer perspective, what Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party did to the people of the Jewish faith, you take that horrible number of 3,000 and multiply it by 2,000, and you come up with this incredible number of approximately 6 million people of the Jewish faith who lost their lives. And by the way, of that 6 million, there were 1,100,000 kids below the age of 10. Hitler had no use for that particular, it didn't matter what age you were. So one of the things that I always like to make mention of the fact is that every country that Hitler occupied, he put certain rules and regulations into effect. They were referred to as the Nuremberg laws. You don't have to read them all. But I always like to point out a few of the things that people can identify with. And of course, the thing that most people are familiar with, that one of the laws was that any time that a person of the Jewish faith came out of their home, prior to doing so, they had to sew on their outer garment a bright yellow star. Within that star, in what I like to call in the Hebraic style of lettering, it spelled the word Jew. If you were in France, If I pronounce it right, it was Juf. If you were in Germany, it was Jude. And in Holland or the Netherlands, it was Jood. Jood. And I have to jump ahead a little bit. It was sometime in the middle 80s. My mom was still living in Southern California. And on one of my visits, I found a box with some old photographs. Had no idea where they came from, what it was. And there's a picture of my mom, a photograph of my mom, probably when she was in her middle 20s. And as I will show you in a second, she's wearing a coat that has one of these stars. You can see the star on her coat. And when I flipped the photograph over, there was a crumbling piece of paper. And when I opened it up, there was one of these stars. It says, "Mom, where did you get that?" She says, "Don't show that to me. Get rid of that. I don't want to see that." All of a sudden there was a rise of emotion. Many thoughts and ideas and things that came up. And here her son is showing this thing. I donated that particular picture to the museum that we have in Seattle. And this is a picture of Mom. And as you can see, the relevance, I should say, of the star is that this star is this star. It's the one that she ripped off her coat. It's not a Hollywood stage. It's the actual thing. It's the living thing. Now, not only did adults have to wear that, but kids down to the age of 6. Now keep in mind, that was a law set up by the Germans. And I'm going to show you the kids. And yeah, that thing with the arrow, it's me. Hair. A lot of hair. Down to the age of 6. And then sometimes the kids would say, "Why did Hitler make people wear these stars?" Well, there have been many books written about that. But one of the reasons was, of course, to dehumanize. Why do I have, every time I go out of my house, bear on my chest what my beliefs are? Whose business is it anyway? And then somebody asked me an interesting question. She says, "My neighbor has 2 young girls, and they go to a Catholic school. And they wear a uniform. Is that any different?" Oh, yes. That is by choice. That is by choice that they want a certain education for their kids. And it is by choice that the parents decide to have their kids go to a particular school. Relative to the star, this is a foreign country that comes across our border and says, "This is what you're going to do." Totally different. Then somebody asked a question, other than dehumanizing, what other reason for wearing the star? Well, one obvious one being, of course, identification. There goes one of them. And then somebody made a conclusion, which I thought was quite accurate. Well, if this was the case for identification, don't wear it. Don't wear it. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. And this is something that even a lot of adults may or may not be aware of. One of the things that happened then and that is happening today, that hopefully none of you do, but life is being what it is, if any of you ever have to go to a hospital and have any kind of procedure done, besides signing your life away, having to pay your bill, but that's another story. Every time that the Germans occupied a country, they took over the seat of government, whether it's state, county, whatever. And they had access to the records within that municipality. If you go to the hospital today and filling out some questions on the form, there is one question that you have to check off or fill in that you did then. And the question is religious preference. You fill it out. Heaven forbid something happens to you. It's been like that always. So when they stopped you, they already knew if your name was on that list. It doesn't matter whether you wear it or not. They already knew who you were, this so-called who being a Jewish person. So one of the things that I remember very clearly, Mom and Dad and I, we lived in an old brownstone walk-up apartment in Amsterdam. And I remember looking out one day and seeing soldiers stopping people. I was 6.5 years old. I have no idea what that was all about, but they didn't break any laws. They were just stopped. Identification. And then many of them were led onto trucks and disappeared. Now, when I say disappeared, it got to the point somebody's mom, somebody's aunt, somebody's grandma, somebody's dad didn't come home that night. What happened to them? People did not know. As the records became clearer over a period of time, many of them were heard at the railroad stations. They didn't know why. They didn't know where they were going. We're going to relocate you. They had no idea. I remember to this day, and I'm going to be very careful because every time I do this, I get a little bit loud, and my wife says, yeah, that's not good. Don't get loud. Don't get loud. Okay. Well, if she says don't get loud, I'm not going to get loud. I remember waking up one night, 11, 12 o'clock, and I remember trucks stopping in front of the apartment complex. And I'll never forget, and the only reason that I get loud, because that's how I remember it. In the middle of the night, very quiet, these German soldiers were yelling at the top of their lungs, Alle Juden, raus! All Jews, out! Here I did it again. I'm getting too loud. I'm going to hear about this right away. But that's how I remember it, yelling, all Jews, get out. They hadn't come to our door yet, for whatever reason. But the next day, some of my friends weren't in class. It wasn't talked about. They got a cold, got the flu, went on vacation. But more and more people started to disappear. And there were several means. Sometimes people got a notice on the door. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, you report to such and such. And if you don't show up, somebody will be knocking on your door. They'll come get you. My mom sat me down one day and was very upset and told me that my aunt and uncle have been arrested. What does that mean? How do you explain that to a 6.5-year-old kid? It wasn't much after that. And she says, Oma and Opa, Grandma and Grandpa have been arrested. What do you mean? What does that mean, arrested? I'm not even 7 years old. I don't know what her answer was. Maybe something, has to do with those soldiers. I don't know. And then came the day, it was about a month later. She was very, very upset. She was crying, and she sat me down and she told me that Papi, Dad, has been arrested. My dad used to like to fish, and he had a little two-man rowboat. Amongst those Nuremberg laws was one of them that states that a Jewish person could not own a boat, if you want to call that a boat. My dad went fishing on one of the canals in Amsterdam, of which there are many. That was not allowed. He was arrested. This was in June of 1942. And that's the last that we ever saw or heard of him again. As I say, more and more people started to disappear. And as in any country, you got good people and you have not such good people. Well, there was a good percentage of people that said, we got to help these people. And they formed a very, very loosely underground, if you want to call it that, resistance force. And what I mean, it'd be one person in one block, two people in another block. And they secretly would do things. For example, the people had to have stamps to buy food, but of course the Jews weren't given any. So somehow, who knows where they got the food. They made some false identification so that when you get stopped, whatever name and how they came up with it, heaven knows. But maybe your name wasn't on that list. False papers. But the most important thing, and how they did this, I don't know. And I want to emphasize when I say I don't know. There are a couple of times during my presentation that I can't give you an answer. I don't know. And this is not going to be Hollywood. I'm not going to make it up. Everything, as many times as I've told this story, even right now, I walk through it in my mind as I remember it. And this comes up several times. And so, one of the things they did, how they found the people, and how would they even approach, hey, would you hide a Jew? Because if you did, and if that Jewish person were to get caught, not only would that be the end of that Jewish person, but the person that gave them shelter and their entire family that day would be sent to a death camp. The Germans would not stand still for somebody helping a Jewish person. So how did they find these people? How did they trust those people? I have no idea. I really don't know. Somehow, my mother found one of these people. Some explanation, the whole family that disappeared, we got to get out of Amsterdam. And they came up. Again, how they found them, I have no idea. Absolutely none. A older couple, Klaas and Rulfina Post. They were two farmers on a little bitty farm in the northeastern part of the Netherlands. I can explain later how I got those pictures. This is how I remember Klaas and Rufina, and this is an actual picture of the farm. It was a little bitty farm. They had a couple of chickens, a couple of pigs, a couple of cows. They worked their fingers to the bone from sunup to dusk, raising in the small piece of real estate they had veggies. They were a devout Christian family. But they could care less about who we were, what we were. They could not care about what the religion was involved. They had the attitude, again, who are these people taking our citizens away? We got to help. Which is not to say that there was another part of the population that was on the side of the Nazis. And it would have happened many times. Hey, there's a couple of them living over there. Yeah, that happened too. But Klaas and Rufina took us in. They were such compassionate people. They shared their hard-earned halves, the food, with no question. There was no money involved. There was no money. And the thing, as I got a little bit older, what really amazed me, not only the decency in their hearts, wanting to help, but and the sharing of those hard work for food. But the mere fact that they gave us shelter, because as I mentioned it a few minutes ago, if for whatever reason, and this would not be an unlikely scenario, that either my mom or I were to get caught by the Nazis, not only would that be the end of us, but it'd be the end of Klaas, Rufina, and their entire family. Well, the Germans started to find out over a period of time that Jewish people were hidden in the farmland. And now, all of a sudden, trucks started to show up with dozens of soldiers. And they'd go through these farms, ransacking, kicking over furniture, yelling, screaming, convinced somebody is hiding somewhere. And many times they were. With, in those days, fixed bayonets on their rifle. They would stab into haystacks. Sometimes somebody was hiding in there. If they survived, they were taken, ended up on the truck, and where did they go? Nobody knew. The people just started to disappear. They literally did not know. So one day Klaas said, we got to do more than have you and your mother be here. This farm, when Mom and I got there, which was in the beginning of 1942, that farm at that time was probably 30, 40 years old. No electricity, no sanitary facilities. You had to go to the bathroom, you had to go outside of the farmhouse in an outhouse. I mean, it was, old. The floor on this little farm was made up of 12-inch wide knotty pine boards. And one day, Klaas came with a saw, and within 2 of these 12-inch boards, he took a saw, and right in the joint, he cut a 6-foot section. So when he cut 6 feet, you could open 12 inches, 12 inch. A foot and a half below that was the filth and dirt of this old farm. Now, when Mom and I heard the trucks coming down the dirt road, we'd run in that room, open up those boards, and we'd jump in. We'd be underneath the floorboards. Klaas or Rufina would put the boards back, throw a rug, couldn't tell anything. And there were numerous times that Mom and I, we just laid there body to body with the Germans walking over our head, a foot and a half above us. All it would have taken is one sneeze, one cough, one hiccup. It would have been all over. Frightening. Did that for a number of months. The raids used to be like every 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And then Klaas said, we got to get you out of the house. Next to the farm, not more than, 100, 200 feet away from the farm, was a little forest. You can't call it forest. It was maybe a half an acre of trees. Nobody ever went in there. And one day, Klaas told me to get a wheelbarrow and a couple of shovels. And this was at dusk. And I want to kind of explain that word dusk, needless to say, when it got dark. Mom and I were on that farm for 2.5 years. During that entire 2.5 year period, there was not a single time that either Mom or I could come outside during daylight hours. Never. Never, never, never. The reason, of course, being there were other farms in the area adjacent. You don't know what their allegiance is. And if Mom and I were to ever come out during daylight hours, somebody might say, hey, who are they? We don't exist. We don't have a body. We don't have a soul. We don't exist. We don't talk to anybody. We don't go outside, ever. And the only time we could come out at dusk when it got dark, Klaus had made some homemade toys in the back of the farm away from the dirt road that I could play with. Mom could get a fresh air when it got dark. So this particular day took me a wheelbarrow, a couple of shovels, and we go into this little forest. We come to a rise and start digging. Took about a day and a half, and we ended up with a hole in the side of this hill, maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall, maybe 3 feet wide, 6 feet deep. Klaus went out of the area and cut down some small trees, just let them fall randomly over the top, like the roof of this, call it a cave, if you will. Then he took the branches and interwove them to the entrance. In other words, to get in, you'd kind of separate and step in, and there was just enough room for Mom and I, body to body, to crawl into this hole. You could stand in front of it. You couldn't see anything. It just blended with nature. And now when we heard the trucks, the German trucks coming down the road, we'd run out of the back and we'd crawl into this hole. Scared the you-know-what out of me. 2 reasons that I remember very clearly. One of them that scared me was every time that we crawled into this hole, dirt came trickling down. I mean, we squeezed in there. I was always afraid the whole thing was going to collapse on us. But the thing that I so much remember, maybe because it frightened me more than anything else, I had an awareness, I can't remember how or what, that we were hiding for particular reasons. Terrible things happened to Grandma and Grandpa. We cannot be seen, caught by these Germans. And the thing that scared me more than anything else, when they were ransacking the farm, I could hear them. It was only 150 feet away, but I couldn't see them because of the camouflage in front. And every time that happened, I could hear them kicking over furniture, convinced somebody's hiding somewhere, but I couldn't see them. And my fear was, is it this time they're going to come and get me? What did I do? I'm a 7-year-old kid. What happened to Dad? Why is Mom and I laying in this hole? Didn't understand this, but it frightened me with the possibility that we were hiding. I could hear them, but I couldn't see them. Well, the mere fact that I'm standing in front of you here, they never made it into that little forest, if you will. It was in the middle of 1943 that the Allies, being the Americans and the British, started to run bombing raids over to Germany to try and wipe out Hitler's war machine, the munition factories, the factories making any factories at all. And they used a particular aircraft, which some of you folks are familiar with, called a B-17 Flying Fortress. It was a 4-engine, and I have to explain that to some of the kids, a 4-engine propeller-driven, what? Propellers? I don't know. You mean a jet? No, didn't have jets. They were propeller-driven aircraft. And they used to, just coincidental, from the time that they left their bases in Great Britain on their way to Germany, it was just coincidental that this little farm happened to be underneath the flight path. Well, the reason that was so important to me as a kid, they came over in formations of 800 to 1,000. 1,000 4-engine bombers The noise was deafening, absolutely deafening. They had a crew, each one of them had a crew of 9. But when these guys got shot up, the room inside was so tight because they left room for ammunition, bombs mainly, that when they went down, there was a tremendous loss of life. By the end of the war, over 5,000 were lost in combat. And when they, like I say, when these guys bailed out, many of them did not get out. So to curtail the loss of life and material, some commander, whatever, in Great Britain decided to run those raids at night. Night runs, hoping to curtail the loss of equipment and life, human life. It was on one of the first runs at night that I remember so clearly. I could hear them coming. The windows started to rattle. The ground shook. I got petrified to such an extent I had to go to the bathroom, something fierce. But I was too afraid. There was all this racket and it was dark to go outside by myself. So I asked my mom to take me, which she did. And we stepped outside of the farm. We're standing in the dirt. And the noise overhead, I mean, it was just shaking. But you looked up, you couldn't see anything. It was nighttime. And then a strange thing happened. My mom had a little flashlight. And just so I wouldn't trip over my own 2 feet in the dirt at night, she wanted to help. And she turned on the flashlight. And when she did, I smacked her in the abdomen with such force, she literally doubled up. Many years later, we laughed about it. It wasn't funny at the time. What in the heck was that all about? Here she's just trying to help. And I hit her and screamed. Well, as adults, we've all gone through when we were younger, and for that matter, even as adults, to have some threatening, scary experiences. And this thing between our ears, many times called the brain, will try to help out. And what I mean by help out, psychologically, make you think, things aren't as bad as that may seem. Or things are worse, you better skedaddle. Psychological, the brain tries to protect the body, and that is what happened in the mind of a 7.5-year-old kid. When mom turned on that light, again, psychologically, I was convinced a bomb was going to come right down that flashlight. That was my fear, that I smacked her with all my force. We talked about that many, many, many times. We were on the farm for 2.5 years. Many more incidents, won't go into all of them, but the raids became more frequent, the German raids. And in her wisdom, my mom decided we got to find another place to hide, because it is not unlikely that somehow one of us or both of us are going to get caught by the Germans. And in the process, those dear, dear people, Klaus and Rufina Post, who risked their lives to give us shelter and give us safety, all of us would have been murdered. Even on the farm, keep in mind, the so-called underground resistance force, they were still pretty much individuals. How my mom, even on the farm, how my mom found one of them, I have no idea. How could she possibly find one of these? It's not something you look up in the phone book. You know, it was all secret. Well, she did. And the underground came up with 2 women in the city of The Hague, Den Haag, as it is pronounced. And they lived in a 3-4-story walk-up apartment, and they were willing to let us use the small room in their places. It was a total different thing. Psychologically, I don't remember how we got from the farm to Den Haag. Had to be scary because I knew we can't be seen, we can't get caught. I don't know. I don't even remember the name of these women. And yet I knew so much about Klaas and Rufina. Again, a psychological trip to nowhere. When we got over there, the rules were still in effect that the Jewish people were not given stamps to buy food as the Christian people were, the non-Jewish people were. Every time, every single day, we were hungry. We had to rely on those women leaving some food scraps. Totally different from the farm. I was never hungry on the farm. But we were very hungry all the time. And I even remember there were 2 occasions, funny you should know, 2, not 3, not 1. There were 2 occasions that once it got dark at night, that my mom disappeared for whatever, half hour, hour. And she came back with a loaf of bread. Don't ask. I have no idea. Where did she get that? Where did she go? Every time that there was any dirty work to be done, whether it was cleaning the floor, the bathroom, whatever, they'd ask Mom to do it. I mean, there was just no compassion. They hardly talked to us. But, you know, we still had to be thankful. After all, they did give us shelter. We were there for a couple of months. And then my mom came up with a terrible word, dirty word. Peter, you haven't been to school. I can't go to school. I'm one of them. I got false papers for you from the underground. And get used to something. You're not Peter Metzelaar anymore. You are now Peter Pelt. How they came up the underground again from the records, whatever. Mom said, if you ever get stopped, you give them the identification, and hopefully your name would not be, the Peter Pelt wouldn't be on that list. It was with that new name, which was the second time that I was scared out of my gourd, because the star came off, and I had to go to a public school. And when I say I got scared, here for over 2.5 years, I was so accustomed of not having a soul, not having a body, not talking to anybody, being secretive about everything, whatever it is that I was. And now I'm just going to go to a regular public school. Psychologically, once again, every time I went to the school, I felt every one of the kids say, hey, there he goes, there's one of them. They didn't know me. I was just one of the guys. But in my mind, I was so afraid of being discovered. I have to qualify something in this little part of the story that I got to tell you. When I speak to an 8th grade or whatever grade, kind of make fun of this a little bit. There's got to be a little humor in all of this. And I asked the kids, do you guys, for the most part, get your grades computer activated? You know, they get their grades online. The majority of the schools do. Well, of course, they didn't have computers in those days. And in the Netherlands, they had a booklet, a rapportboekje. A report book, a little booklet that the teacher filled in. I still have that one. It is fading, but it still has Peter Pelt here. And then I tell the kids something. I get a kick out of this. here were the different subjects. And I said, you'll notice something, that the grades are numerical. Not like what you guys get, your A, B's, and C's. Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to imply anybody here gets C's, everybody gets A's and B's, right? I always get a big roar. Yeah. Amongst those grades, there are a couple of 5s out of 10. Had something to do, I think it was an F minus. But it had to do with behavior, which was really crazy because I was always so afraid to be discovered. I didn't behave well, probably drew more attention to me than I intended. But, you know, that's how it was, two grades. Now I had to explain to the youngsters and even to some adults. I always ask the question, does anybody know the first country on the planet that developed a rocket for war purposes, a missile? Well, the answer happens to be Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany had a young man by the name of Werner von Braun. When he was 21 years old, he got his doctorate in physics. And he and a bunch of scientists developed this first rocket called the V2. It stood 39 feet tall, about 3 stories tall, and carried a 2,500-pound explosive. And they fired them almost at will on a daily basis from the western slopes of Europe, all the way from Scandinavia to the Netherlands, to Belgium, to Spain, to France, fired them over to England, where the bombers came from. Well, Hitler was in a big hurry to get these things operational, and some of them never got to the military bases. Some of them landed on the big cities, including London. And the history books will show that there's over 9,000 Brits that lost their lives because of these missiles, never, ever got to the military bases. Now what I'm leading up to, and this kind of galls me in a way, but this is how life is. At the end of the war, the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France tried to apprehend as many of what I like to call the butchers of the Holocaust, at least those that hadn't escaped, many of them to South America, some of them to the United States and Canada, to put them on trial for crimes against humanity. But when it came to Herr Dr. Werner von Braun, who in 1937 joined the Nazi Party, and who in 1944 became a member of the SS, the worst of the worst. When it came at the end of the war, the United States approached Werner von Braun and says, "Want to come to America? You and your scientists? We won't prosecute. We want you over there." It was called Operation Paperclip. And 500 German scientists, and Werner von Braun as head of it, came to Huntsville, Alabama. And yes, it was a former Nazi, a killer, who put the United States on the moon in June of 1969. His scientific groups developed, which up to last year was the most powerful rocket ever built, called the Saturn V. I have a photograph, kind of mixed here. Here's a picture of a V2 being fired up. And here in the civies is Werner von Braun in front of the butchers. And here's Werner von Braun in his later years amongst the Saturn V. Yes, it was a former Nazi German who headed the NASA getting up to the moon in 1969. The firing of those rockets, the British weren't thrilled, needless to say. So they had their own well-known Air Force, the RAF, Royal Air Force. And they had an aircraft called a Lancaster that used to be a bomber. And they used to try and bomb those launching facilities of those V2s that kept being fired over to England. On the right is a picture which was a very famous World War II fighter called a Spitfire, part of the British. And they used to try, like I say, and bomb out the launching facilities, which many times was difficult for the reason that the Germans, you know, being pretty smart, used to use those launching facilities on the back of railroad cars, and they used to move. They were hard to find sometime. The Germans decided to use some anti-aircraft batteries to try and shoot these guys down when they're coming from England. And how did they do it? Well, they decided to go into the middle of a city and put those anti-aircraft guns on top of roofs of civilian buildings. Matter of fact, you can tell over here, you can see the city. I mean, they had these big heavy-duty guns, figuring that the British weren't going to bomb the civilian area. Well, many of them got through. And it turned out that every time that the Spitfires and the bombers came over, the German Air Force, called the Luftwaffe, sent up their Messerschmitt fighters, and there used to be dogfights over the city, trying to shoot each other down. Well, today in so-called modern warfare, you don't hear all that much about dogfights. Today, you got a very sophisticated machine capable of 2,000 plus miles an hour with a highly trained pilot. All he does is hit a button and some missiles leave his wingtips. And 100 miles down the road, some people get their brains blown out, some for the good, some not. But the result of that was that you could find in the city exploded ammunition from anti-aircraft trying to shoot these fighters down. Those were steel exploded ammunition, whether it was from a bomb, whether it was from high caliber bullets. That's referred to as shrapnel. This is kind of what it looked like. Very nasty looking, heavy steel, jagged. Now, I have to call some young boys pretty stupid. I was one. In the United States, and most of you have heard, at a certain age, many of the kids participate in something called trading cards. National Hockey League, the NFL, the NBA. Hey, Charlie, I'll trade you ho, ho, ho for ha, ha, ha. Whatever. No such thing existed in Europe, probably still doesn't. But leave it up to some pretty stupid young kids. And that was, those raids used to come about once a week, and there'd be these dog fights, because they kept trying to destroy the launching facilities of those rockets. And the kids, you could find these things all over the place, on the streets, came from the sky. And the kids used to collect them because they were all these different shapes. So next day in school, Hey, Charlie, look at this funny one. I'll trade you for the two that you... Are you kidding me? Exploded ammunition. We used to trade those. I have those. I still have those. It was on a Sunday where we were hiding. Those two women was about a block away from a park. And my mom got courageous, wanted to get some air, and decided to go a walk to the park on a Sunday. We no sooner get to the park, the air raid sirens started to come, meaning the British are on the way over, the Germans are going to intercept all, you know what is going to break loose. Everybody ran into these underground concrete bomb shelters. Stinky, stinky, smelly places, but it was safe. You could hear the rat-a-tat of machine guns, bombs exploding, but it was safe. And this could last from anywhere 20 minutes to 40 minutes, and it just about came about every week. On this particular day, I don't remember how long I was in there, you know, probably 40 minutes, whatever. And the all clear sounded, and we come out. Now this is on Sunday, school the next day. So I'm holding my mom's hand, and we're walking in the middle of the street, and I'm looking for pieces of shrapnel to trade in school the next day. As we walk a little while, I look about 30 feet ahead, and there's a piece of shrapnel I had never seen before. It was humongous. It was like 2-3 times bigger than these 3 pieces put together. Chunk of steel, jagged, nasty looking. All I knew is I got to get this sucker, because if somebody wants to trade me for that, they'd have to give me everything they ever collected. Nobody had ever seen anything that big. I pull away from my mom, I run over to this thing, and I remember I was wearing red knobby gloves. All the stupid thing, red, had the little knobbies on my gloves. I don't know why I remember that. But I pull away from my mother, and I run over to this thing, because all I could think of, I'm going to be a big shot in school the next day. Nobody had ever seen anything that big. I pick it up, and it took 2 hands to pick it up. It was that heavy. And even though I was wearing gloves, I also remember that heat came through my gloves. I didn't care. I'm going to be a big shot in school the next day. I was so proud of this thing. I showed Mom, and I show it to her, and she doesn't say anything. She takes one look at it, takes both of her hands underneath mine, and makes me heave the thing away. It wasn't 10 seconds when, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you up. There's an explosion on the street. There's a 10-inch crater. I have no idea what it was that I picked up, but whatever it was live. My only regret was I wasn't going to be a big shot in school the next. I would not be standing, not been standing here either. Hitler and his henchmen called a meeting in a city called Wannsee, W-A-N-S-E-E. It's a suburb south of Berlin, and he brought in several dozen of his butchers, generals, and politicians. And in 1 hour and 20-minute meeting that they had, they came up with what the history books today refer to as the final solution, how to eradicate every person of the Jewish faith, starting with Europe. When that happened, those raids I keep talking about, they now went 24/7. Whether it was in the farmland, whether it was in the city, up and down the street, kicking down doors, arresting people. Again, where did they take them? Nobody knew. How my mom found out, it's a question that I asked her 1,000,000 times. I never got an answer. Either she forgot, wanted to forget, didn't want to remember. I don't know what it was. But here was what she knew and what I wanted to know. Because of these women got so scared with these trucks coming up and down and arresting people, they were afraid that we would get caught. And if we did, by them giving us shelter, it'd be the end of their life too. So Mom found out they were going to turn us in. That was the easy way. Come and get them. We got a couple of them here. Well, when that happened, needless to say, we had to get out of there. How do we get out of there? She got hold of one of those underground people again. Who knows how? And they came up with a room that we could use back in Amsterdam. Now, the distance between the city of The Hague and Amsterdam, it's not much more than 45, 50 miles. The only trouble is there is no transportation. There are no buses, there are no trains, no bicycles, no motorcycles, nothing. Not to mention the fact that in those days there was one highway connecting the two cities and no civilians allowed. It was strictly to be used for German convoys, wherever the heck they were going. I wake up one night, early night, and my mom is sitting at a little table with what looked like a bunch of bed sheets, and she is sewing by hand at candlelight. She ended up making a skirt, a top with some buttons, pocket, and a little hat out of bed sheets. I said, what are you doing? She says, go back to sleep. She ended up sewing a semblance of a nurse's uniform. I woke up, I don't know what time it was, midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, whatever it was. And she says, get dressed. We got to get out of here. It was wintertime. I got bundled up. She got bundled up, and she put this contraption around herself, this so-called nurse's uniform. We tippy-toed out of the apartment. We had no belongings, and we were treading through the snow, scared to death because there were curfews. No people after whatever time. So every time we passed a block, I had to look that there was nobody that could see us. I said to Mom, I said, where are we going? She says, be quiet. I don't want to hear your voice. We walked for about another mile. Now I'm 10 years old. And all of a sudden, I start to realize something. I said, Mom, we're not going to this highway, are we? She says, yes, Peter, we got to get to Amsterdam. I said, no. I said, they got the German troops there representing the people that want to kill us. We can't go there. She says, Peter, I told you to be quiet. As daylight came about, we got closer to this highway, could see German soldiers marching, tanks, flatbed trucks with artillery on it. I got petrified. Now we get to the highway, right to the highway, and now my mom does something what I like to refer to as the doo-doo is going to hit the fan. She starts to hitchhike. I said, what are you doing? She says, I'm not going to tell you again. You be quiet. So I am standing there trembling, 10 years old. A flatbed truck stops, and an SS officer gets out. The SS was the worst of the worst. The black uniforms, the skulls on their caps. The majority of guards at the death camps were SS officers. This guy gets out and starts to read my mother the Riot Act. I want to make mention of the fact that my mom was originally born in Austria. She came to Holland when she was 19, when she married my dad. So she spoke and understood fluent German. So the guy says, what are you doing here with a child? This is for the fatherland. No civilians allowed, blah, 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 blah. I have no idea why the guy would even give her a chance to explain. And here was her story. She says, "Sir, you know about the British bombing the V-2 rocket sites?" "Yeah, yeah. Ich weiß das. I know that." "So?" "Well, just a few days ago, one of the British bombs hit the building, the kid here, pointing at me. It killed his father and his mother. And as you can see, I'm a nurse for the International Red Cross, and I'm taking him to an orphanage in Amsterdam." The guy didn't say anything. He grabbed my mother by the arm. I'm hanging on to her. Walks us over to the truck, this flatbed truck, and now he separates myself from my mom. It was brutally scared because she was my only security. After he separates Mom from myself, he takes her by the arm and walks her over to the cab of the truck. There was an SS soldier, a driver, and he helps my mom into the cab of the truck next to the German soldier driver. Now he comes back. I don't know what's going to happen to me now. I am shaking. Again, he doesn't say anything. He picks me up, puts me in the back of the flatbed truck in the snow. Doesn't say anything. I'm sitting in the snow. He goes to the cab of the truck and gets in. I'm sitting by myself in the snow. Mom is sitting between the two SS officers, and they took us to Amsterdam. She fooled them. She fooled them. You had a couple of Jews sitting in between. How did she ever come up with this convoluted plan? I mean, I have no idea. How did she ever come up with this? I mean, anyway, they took us where we wanted to go, to Amsterdam. It was in May of 1945 that the Canadians liberated the Netherlands. It was a joyous day. It was 5 years almost to the day that the Canadians ran the Nazis out of Holland. The war was over. Nobody in my family came back. We did not know what happened to any of them. It was 4 years later, in order to find a better life, that we came to America. My mom had a friend in New York who vouched for us. You know, the laws were all different in those days. And we came to the United States in New York, ended up after a number of months going to Southern California. I got to take this little side trip. It's funny, but it happened. Every time the Dutch, it's a screwy language. It's terrible. A lot of But anyway, I was a Dutch boy. I wanted to practice, but my mom wanted such distance from her past, and I used to speak to her in Dutch, and then she answered me in English with this heavy Austrian Dutch accent speaking in English. And she applied for citizenship. Well, in those days, I don't know what it is now, you had to be in America for 5 years. And then it used to be, I think, a joke. One of the tests that they gave you that you had to pass, they would ask you the question, who is buried in Grant's tomb? Yeah. Well, if you flunked that, maybe you shouldn't become a citizen. Anyway, what happened after 5 years, she became a citizen. In those days, there was a rule, a law, that how do I explain that? if a kid was within a certain age when the parent became a citizen, the kid became a citizen. But I happened to be something like a year over, so I had to wait until I was 19 or 20 or whatever it was. So Mom was a citizen. I wasn't, and whenever we ever, tongue-in-cheek, whenever we had some kind of argument, she'd say, you know, all you foreigners are alike. You know, she was a citizen, I wasn't. I wasn't. Well, we moved to the West Coast, and I never talked much about my experience. My friends, high school, my friends knew, you know, part of my story. I never went into any details. And even psychologically, I think it was, doesn't every kid go through this? No, I don't think so. But all of that changed a few years later. I got married. I was in the U.S. Army. And one of my sons lived in Washington State. I have 3 sons. And he and his wife, because of his work, got an opportunity to head some group in Brussels, Belgium, the country just south of the Netherlands. And he was there for about a year. And it was in October of 1992. Now, mind you, I'd been in America for what, around 50 years? And then we got a call and said, Dad, why don't you guys come over for the holidays? Oh, boy. I thought I'd never been back. All these years I was in America, I'd never been back. And one of the things is, I bet it happened once a week. I always thought, what happened to that little farm and those dear people, Klaus and Rufina Post? And I had the sick feeling, where was this village where we were in hiding, this farm? I had no idea. My mom was quite ill at the time, and I asked her, and she didn't remember. I said, Mom, this is important to me. I want to try, I don't know what I'm looking for. And then she came up with a funny name, the Feeneburen. And when she mentioned that name, I don't know where it came from, but I remember it was the dirt road that the farm was on. I said, that's wonderful, Mom. I said, but what was it? What am I going to do? Go to a foreign country and ask them about the dirt road? I mean, you know, she didn't remember. I went to the library, I got an atlas out, and I looked at all these weird names, and nothing jumped at me. There was one name, Makingha. You got the ha, Makingha. And then the more I thought about it, it didn't mean anything. I asked Mom, I said, what's the farm in a place called Makingha? No idea. She didn't know. It was with that great knowledge that my wife and I flew to Europe, to Belgium, to be with my son and daughter-in-law. And we spent a wonderful week in Belgium. By the way, how many of you have been to Brussels? Quite a few. You know, one of the things that I always remember when you used to go into the underground when we were there, the subway, in Belgium, they make great Belgian waffles. Yeah, really. I mean, it's no joke. Great stuff. And anyway, we spent a week in Brussels, and the 4 of us, my son, my daughter-in-law, and my wife and I, got in the car and drove to Amsterdam. Only about a 2.5 hour drive, 3-hour drive. You know, the distances there aren't what they are here. And when we got to Amsterdam, I got the biggest kick out of it because I was still able to read advertising. Not that I knew what it meant, but I was able to read the advertising signs. The only thing that stuck out in me, I kind of compared everything when I was a little kid before I went into hiding. And we were standing somewhere downtown in Amsterdam, And I saw the golden arches. I never remember seeing that. No, I don't remember seeing that. Well, we just became tourists. We took the canal cruise. We went to the Van Gogh and the Rijksmuseum, world-famous museum. And we also visited the Anne Frank house. I always make a point of mentioning that because the majority of kids, by the time they get to the 8th, 9th grade, have read the diary of Anne Frank. And it was produced in 75 languages. And for those of you, I imagine most of you familiar, you know, they hid 7 of them, the Frank family and friends, in an attic in back of an office for 2 years, not able to go outside. And they got betrayed. Somebody turned them in. They all ended up going to death camps. Anne herself and her daughter and her sister Margot ended up in a camp called Bergen-Belsen. Anne died 2 weeks before liberation. And here's the interesting part. To this day, it is never absolutely sure who betrayed them. How did they get turned in? How did they get discovered? But it was something like 6, 7 years ago. I read an interesting, I think they might have had it on CBS, the story. There was a retired American FBI agent who took it upon himself to go into all kinds of research, papers, you know, addresses, on and on. One of the things that the Germans did, and this is how he came up with the conclusion, that he felt it is probably not 100%, but it's probably 97.5% sure what happened. And that was this. The Germans, in order to control the Jewish population in Amsterdam, recruited something like a dozen Jewish people to use control, to distribute what little food there were. And they got rewarded for that by being offered better food, to kind of control the Jewish population. As the war got progressed, they couldn't get more information. So all of a sudden, this so-called board of Jewish people, slowly they started to disappear because the Germans didn't have any more use for them. And it is this FBI's agent that concluded that they ended up probably with one individual. And they were convinced there were still being hidden people, hidden Jews. And it is this FBI agent's idea that he thinks what happened, that they talked to this guy. Either you find out who these people are hiding, or you're into a death camp. And they think that it was a Jewish person that turned them in order to save their life. It's not sure, but they never did know 100% sure. Anyway, little side story. We spent the day several days in Amsterdam, and then we drove to this Mackinga, was another 2-hour drive north. And we're on the freeway, and there's this little sign, Mackinga. It really didn't mean a thing to me. And we pull off, and we get into this rather quaint-looking village. And about 2 blocks up the road is a little bank called Robo Bank. Remember the name. Now, this is in October of 1992. My son was driving, and I says, pull up at the bank. I said, you know, the majority of Dutch people speak better English than I do. until you get out into the Tules, and it might be a little different. But I said, I'm going to make a fool of myself. We're going to go into that bank. I'm going to ask for that dirt road. We go inside, again, myself, my daughter-in-law, my son, and I. And the lady says, can I help you? I says, yes. I said, we're from the United States. And I said, I got a question for you. It is embarrassing. I said, have you ever heard of a dirt road called the Feineburen? And I'm ready to tuck my tail between my legs. I really felt embarrassed. I'm in a foreign country asking them about a dirt road. She says, sir, would you repeat that name? I said, well, I don't know if I pronounce it so correct. Feineburen. And she gets a smile. She says, that's 5 minutes from here. Are you kidding me? I mean, that was so emotional. I mean, the four of us were hugging, we were crying, not even knowing where in the heck we were, but having found it. In my case, stepping back into my history of almost 60 years ago, we were making such a racket, the manager came out, I don't know, he probably thought it was a holdup or something, and he invited us into his office. And I told him why we were here and so forth. I said to him, by chance, I said, have you ever heard of the Klaus and Rufina Post family? And he said, of course I have. I said, how did you know them? He says, well, my predecessor, who was a manager here, introduced me to them. They used to bank here. Oh my gosh. I said to him, what happened to them? Which was kind of a stupid question because they would have been, I don't know, 136 years old or something. But he said they passed away about 20 years before. And, I have told this story since 1999. And, when I get to that, it still gets me. Why didn't I go back before? Give him a hug. Thank you for saving my life. But, one of the things I learned from that, don't have regrets. I can't bring them back. I can't thank them. And then the manager says, that farm is still there. It's not very far from here, 5 minutes. He says, I don't personally know the people, but I'm sure they'll let you look around. And I mean, we walked out of that office in a daze. We get in the car, we get on the dirt road. My son was driving, and all of a sudden, a bunch of farms showed up, and I said, this is it. I recognized it. New paint, it gotten bigger, new barns, new foliage. After all, only 60 years went by. I went out of the car and I knocked on the door. I wanted to go inside and see in that room if those boards were still there. After 60 years that Mom and I hid underneath the floorboards, but nobody was home. I went to the back of the farm where I used to be able to come out at dusk and play with some homemade toys. It was the strangest feeling. I felt like I was 7, 8 years old again. Just a weird feeling. Now, this was first week in December of '92. And I said, I want to go into that little forest. I want to see if there's some remnant of the cave that I helped build. So we walk over there. Again, it's just a couple of 100 feet. And it was pretty crunchy, frozen, snow on the ground. And for whatever reason, we split up. My family goes one way, my son went some other way, and I went another way. And every time when there is a little rise in the ground, I kind of step on the ground and said, yeah, this could have been here somewhere. We weren't in this little forest for 7, 8 minutes. And about 40, 50 feet away, my son calls out, Dad, come here. I found it. And folks, there was the cave like I left it 60 years ago. It didn't have the twigs in the front anymore. This is a picture of the daughter, Lena, of Klaus and Rufina. I never knew her. She was about 15. When we came to the farm, she became a domestic or something. She didn't live at home anymore. And she ended up, I traced her down through this manager at the bank, took 3 months. And she and her family lived in the city of Delft. And here in 1998, she came visit the old farm, and I just love that stare that she has. It's the look in her eyes that she visited there. I have a little screwdriver on my keychain, and on this picture here, I carved my mom and my initials in there. But this was just absolutely unbelievable after that, all that time. We spent the whole day there. We drove back in silence almost, having discovered so many years ago what was still there. And something that I had mentioned to friends and mentioned to other people, and they all said, "What are you, some kind of a nut?" I said, "Yeah, just ask my wife. She'll tell you." And that was, if I ever had the chance, I wanted to visit a Nazi concentration camp. And when we got back to Belgium, my son had made some arrangements. And a few days later, we flew on LOT, L-O-T Airlines, which is the Polish national airline. And we flew to a beautiful, beautiful medieval city called Krakow. 12th century old city, beautiful city. However, about 25-minute drive from this beautiful city. And forgive me, my wife tells me, "Don't do this." And I ask you people, if you ever meet my wife, don't tell her I did this. Going to use a language that may not be becoming. 25 minutes outside of this beautiful medieval city was the largest, the most inhumane piece of hell that man ever created for man, called Auschwitz-Birkenau. Auschwitz-Birkenau was a camp with sub-camps that covered 15 square miles. At any given time, the prison population was over 155,000. So that is where some of those people went to. Every history book that you will ever open up, what they mentioned, you will always see this building with the tunnel, the rusting railroad tracks that came from all over Europe. People came on trains. When I say trains, there were cattle cars that at any given time would hold whatever, 40, 50 head of cattle. They'd put several hundred people on there, depending on what city they were arrested. On that train, there was only 1 square foot with barbed wire of air coming in. No food, no water, no toilet facilities. And depending what country they were arrested at, some of them it took 2 days to get to Auschwitz. 10% of the people, when they opened up the doors, were dead. Didn't even make the trip. Then they were all, and by the way, one of the main gates still has the original sign, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free. Yeah, right. And when they got to Auschwitz, inside of that tunnel, everybody had to get out. This was called the area of selection. You can see the tunnel that the trains come through. And they split the people up in 2 groups. One group were the younger men that could be used for slave labor. They went into one. And by the way, these lines could be a mile long. This camp had trains coming 24/7, one after the other. One after the other, just kept coming. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. So they had the young people on one side, the old people and women with little kids or babies in the other side. They were told to go forward. There was a physician, and he, of course, became well known, a Dr. Mengele, who did many, many experiments on live, unanesthetized people. And supposedly he sat at the table and just pointed. He pointed. Links, left, right. If you went left, it was generally the young people. They went in a slave labor camp, most of them not lasting more than 3-4 weeks, or one square piece of bread and a sip of water every day. For whatever reason, the old people and the young people with the kids were told another story. Who knows why? You've been on a train for several days, you got lice on you, you're filthy, I'm going to have to take a shower. Well, keep in mind, those people had no idea what they were doing there. Why were they there? What happened to the rest of their family? They didn't know what was happening. So maybe a shower didn't sound so bad. And then they were given a towel. No panic here. And then they were led to an underground bunker, a concrete bunker. As I understand, there were 3 of those that could hold 300 people. And there were several others that held 1,000 people. And they went inside, and when you looked up at the ceiling, they didn't know, but there were dummy shower heads. It all looked pretty real. No panic. Then they were giving the instructions. Every man, woman, and child, strip, remove your clothes. Hang it up on the hooks and remember the number so that after you take your shower, you pick up your own clothes. Once they were given those instructions, the middle door shut. Some panels opened up in the ceiling, and there were some soldiers on the roof with 2-pound canisters of a material called Zyklon B. They were cyanide pills. They just dropped randomly. Folks, all hell broke loose. People screaming, people coughing, people choking. And between 1.5 and 3 minutes, depending which of the bunkers they were led into, either 300 or 1,000 Jews lay dead. Those were the gas chambers. In the back of the gas chambers, there were some mini trolley tracks, and they took out, I'm sorry, I should watch my language. We got some younger people here. But some of the younger people came out and picked up the bodies, transported them in front of the crematoria. If you can possibly envision it, and I don't even know how it could be done, but between the gas chambers and the crematoria, there were days that they got rid of 4,000 bodies in a day. In a day. I took some photographs when I was there. It still shows the old gun towers. There's one of the crematorias in the background. The entire camp was surrounded with high-tension electrical wires. There were numerous people. There was just no humanity left. There were many of them that just walked into these wires and finished it all off. I took another couple of pictures of the crematoria. Those chimneys, I mean, that just happens to be one of them. They had 6 of them. Those chimneys never stopped smoking, and I won't go into any details relative why. Use your imagination. We got some youngsters here. It was, I won't even go into it because it's hard to believe what in fact took place. I took another photograph, I saw these black things, these lamps, these lights, usually indicating the end of the line of a railroad. I can see the old gun tower still there. It was pretty frosty. And I called it the end of the line, not even realized until I did it. In that one camp alone, in this one camp alone, they murdered 1,100,000 people. And they had 5 camps. They had thousands of camps, but only 5 of them that were built for one purpose only, and that was to kill. That's the only reason they were built. And Auschwitz happened to be the largest of those. So we're 3/4 way through, folks, and the one thing that I always say when we discuss things, if later on in the lobby or whatever, if anybody has any question, I have no trouble answering. There's nothing too sensitive, but don't get me going into politics. I won't touch it. And I'll explain to you why I will not go into that. And here's something that a lot of people just don't give that much thought to. And this is the source of Webster's dictionary. Propaganda. Think of it. Misleading information to promote a particular cause or view. Misleading. In other words, it's not true. But the reason that I bring that up, because that propaganda works. It worked then, and it works now. And I'm going to show you a saying, and I can just about tell what some people are thinking, what I'm talking about, but that happens to be not so. What is he talking about? Well, here's the saying, folks. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The person that said that was Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister. Here is an advanced society, Germans, that within their government, even this horrible, horrible Hitler-driven Nazi government, who hires a full-time minister for one purpose: lie, make up stories. He is the one that made that statement. Now, here we get on the very sensitive subject sometime. There are people today that said, you know, the Jews really overdid it a little bit. 6 million? Maybe they meant 600. Or it never happened. Well, the thing is, it happened. And if you take into your history books this horrible event called the Holocaust, it is one of the most, I'm going to stop. It is one of the most recorded and documented events in history. Those people that say that it didn't happen, that is an opinion. Well, we got a right to our opinion, but don't make it a fact. You got to back it up. I found one little thing as a factual thing what happened to my family. And that is when I visited Auschwitz. It's a huge museum today. And I found a transport list showing the murder of my father, grandparents, and uncle in Auschwitz. This is an actual transportation from the Netherlands. And here it has Rachel Metzelaar was my grandma. Auschwitz, this was the date, 10/26/42 that they died. October 26, coincidental, happens to be my birthday. They killed my grandparents on my birthday. Simon, my dad, August, Auschwitz. Sander, my grandfather, Auschwitz. My Uncle Leo. It is proof. It's not an opinion. And somebody brought up the idea, for example, with the military. What record do they have? And I remember telling a story at a retirement facility. And the person, I don't know what they were going for, but they were trying to make me say a certain thing, except I happened to have a retort for that. And that was, and I asked him, I says, have any of you ever heard of a guy by the name of Dwight David Eisenhower? Eisenhower in those days was a 5-star general. They don't make those anymore. The last 5-star general was Omar Bradley, the Bradley tank. That was in 1950. They don't go and rank above 4 stars now. But it was Eisenhower who led the world's largest expeditionary force, thousands of troops, thousands of ships that finally brought Hitler's reign to an end in Europe. Not only was he in charge of that, but in 1952, he became the 34th president of the United States. During the war, and picture this, a high-ranking, they didn't come any higher, head of the military. He went with some of the troops that liberated some of the camps, and he brought reporters in. And anybody here, you can get online, Google or whatever, and find this picture. This is not propaganda, folks. This is the real thing. Some of you no doubt will recognize Eisenhower, but here is the amazing part. At the end of World War II, General Eisenhower made a decision to personally visit as many concentration camps as he could. His reasons. He wanted to document the camps in their appalling condition. The thing that surprised me more than anything else, because now we're talking about this happened 80 years ago. Anticipating a time when Nazi atrocities might be denied, General Eisenhower ordered the filming and photographing of the camps they liberated. 80,000 feet of film in those days. So this military group I was talking to, I said, why don't you argue with a 5-star general? I said, he had the proof. He had the actual proof. So we're about to finish something up. I'm going to show you a picture now. I got to hear an awe. Are you ready for this? You too. I'm going to show you a picture now. Hair again, hair. Every time I get to talk to somebody, they have hair. I like those pants. Now, this was at the end of the war. This was just before we came to America. I guess I was, 13 and a half. The reason that I bring this up, folks, this is, I don't even know I wasn't even prepared. This was the first number of years in my life. There have been many years since that time, but as I say, there have been a number of events in my life that just keep happening. And here is one of them that is the most recent. And to show you how ill-prepared I was, because it happened just 3 months ago. This morning at the hotel, I scribbled what I was going to say. I'm going to read it, because I don't remember. I'm going to read it, what happened. I wanted to incorporate it in my story, the first portion of my life, and then this happened. And here, I'm going to say it slowly, because you got to picture this. I have to add something remarkable. a little over a year ago, someone at the office of the Holocaust Center in Seattle told me that they received a phone call from the Netherlands, 8,000 miles away. The individual found me, my name, online and wanted to speak to me. 80 years later, somebody wants to talk to me. I don't have any relatives. I don't have anybody in Holland. A total stranger. He called back and told me something astounding. He read my story and did research and find out that his grandparents owned the property and the ranch next to the post that hid me. Can you imagine this all these years later? This stranger stated that when he was very small, he had met the post. Further, he stated, though not sure, that he left, that he felt that his grandparents must have known that the post were hiding my mom and myself. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, somebody that when I was 6, 7 years old that found the history. It was over 75 years ago. We spoke a long time. And here comes the most amazing part. After a few weeks, this stranger, that I never knew who this guy was, the stranger called me back stating he had made reservations for himself and his daughter to come to the U.S. to meet me. He was so interested in history that he actually came. They actually came here to meet me this past September. Unreal. I want to show you, we took some pictures, a giant of a man. This is him. The guy is 6'6" or something like that. That is his daughter. That is a photograph. Those of you who got the little book, that picture is in there. That photograph that you see up there is in the museum in Seattle. I'm pointing at myself sitting in the front row over there. That is me. I mean, these people, at their own expense, total strangers, came to meet me. Unbelievable. So, my story just seems to go on after 80 years. So, I will continue to tell my story as long as my body and mind will permit it. I hope by telling my story, it will honor 6 million stories which will never be told. Thank you very much.